this is just my opinion, and there's
Mm,
certainly a divide right now, at least in my eyes, and in the fighting game community, which is what we call like the FGC.
mm,
Um, and it all started with, I guess it started in 2013 when Capcom made Capcom Pro Tour and Capcom Cup, which is basically their esports circuit,
mm,
with Street Fighter 4 or the later stages of Ultra Street Fighter 4. And what happened was because Capcom and Street Fighter 4 had such a great monetary success with that game, it allowed him to do the circuit, right? And it put Street Fighter 4 on such a higher pedestal than it already was because it was already the number one fighting game out there.
mm.
That money and sponsors started coming in, and it was great, right? From 2013 to about 2015 to the tail end of Capcom Cup, which was like the beginning of or the end of 2015. I think fighting games were at its highest as far as um, Capcom was succeeding with Street Fighter 4, and then every other game saw an increase because Street Fighter 4 was so popular. So people were automatically looking for other avenues like
Mm.
Guilty Gear or Persona, Tekken, right? Um, but what happened was with the partnership with Sony and Street Fighter, Capcom, um, I think was not a mistake because Street Fighter 5 wouldn't be a thing if not for Sony's money. Um, but what happened was it became esports, right? And actual
Esports
esports. And if
first,
you,
yeah.
yeah, and if you know anything about fighting games,
That's the sense I got from it. Because
yeah,
for me, like I was totally uninterested by Street Fighter Five, like, and like
you're not alone.
when it was announced, like you could just sense that it, like, for me who grew up like playing Street Fighter like two, um,
Hmm.
and I played quite a bit of Street Fighter Four as well. And then when Street Fighter Five was announced, it just seemed like it just seemed like it wasn't meant for me from like any sort of like nostalgia point of view, as like,
Yeah.
a 90s kid or whatever. It just seemed like, okay, this is for people who want to compete, you know. That's the sense I got from it. And yeah.
Yeah, sort of. This is like I was saying. There's a divide right now
Mm,
between what the fighting game community kind of really wants and what the fighting game wishes for, like Street Fighter 5 to become. So
mm,
what's going on now is you have mostly new players. The fighting game community calls them 16ers because they jumped on the bandwagon in 2016 with Street Fighter 5, and and then you have a little bit of the stock of the old players who are seeing fighting games rise to, having all these sponsors and all this money thrown around. But the game itself, Street Fighter Five, is not the game we, at least most of like the hardcore fighting game community wants to lead the esports movement because it's not a game we support. The game is still it's been out for since February of 2016, so it's been out about a year and a half now, and it's still incomplete.
mm,
It doesn't have it doesn't have that essence of what Street Fighter is. It just has Street Fighter characters in a game that isn't Street Fighter to me. It's very I think what happened there is they wanted to make more people play it. They made it more beginner friendly, but they lost the depth of what fighting games, what separates people who play fighting games for a long time versus people who just pick up fighting games. So
mm.
you lost that middle ground. So now there's no depth to playing the game. So if you look at numbers and you look as far as just overall, people talking around the fighting game, Street Fighter 5 does not have very good cachet among fighting game players, but it does have cachet among people who support esports. Um, so you have that divide. You have the fighting community, and then you have like the esports kind of like suits and tie, you know, who want that game to do well.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I was totally unaware that there's a bit of a divide between
Yeah.
esports and the fighting game community. So where do you see the fighting game community going forward then, now that esports is kind of a threat to what you guys feel like like fighting game should be?
Well, I don't think esports is so much of a threat. I think
Mm,
the game, because Street Fighter has the name Street Fighter and it has
mm,
that cachet behind it and the history and tradition,
mm,
um, people put that game on a pedestal to lead us, right? To lead the fighting game community in esports. But because
Mm,
the product itself isn't very good, um, you have other games. Right now, I think in 2017, I think the fighting game landscape, as far as games, is as best as it's ever been. Because you have King of Fighters 14, which is really good. You have Guilty Gear Xrd, Revelator 2, which is superb, like anime fighting game. You have Blaze Blue series, it's always been solid. And then you have Tekken 7, which in my opinion is the best fighting game on the market right now. I think that game is absolutely superb. So when you're looking at the landscape of fighting games and as far as quality, and then you have on the horizon, you have Blaze Blue coming up with like a cross mix of like it's a game called Under Night and Birth, and then Persona with Blaze Blue, and I forgot that character from, what is it called, like RWBY or something like that. And then you have the Dragon Ball Fighters, which is a very, I mean, that's as far as a cached name you'll have, Dragon Ball Z in a
mm,
proper fighting game universe. So when you're looking at the landscape, fighting games are thriving as far as quality.
mm.
So what's going on now? Tekken has their own esports circuit, and King of Fighters has their own little esports circuit, and Guilty Gear is trying a little bit with their developer Arc System Works. So you have these little smaller communities within the fighting game community who are doing really good things. It's just because people don't have that name recognition. I mean, Tekken does a little bit, but like if you tell the common man Guilty Gear or Blaze Blue, they don't know what that is.
No.
Um,
I
so
I barely
it's
know
kind of a
I
divide.
barely know Blaze Blue. I don't know Guilty Gear. I played Blaze Blue Continuum something back in the day.
Yeah, Continuum Shift.
Yeah, Continuum Shift. Yeah. Uh,
Mm.
the other Guilty Gear I haven't played at all. I played quite a bit of King of Fighters when I was a kid. King of Fighters 2000, King of Fighters 99, 2000, 2001, but mostly
Yeah,
2000. I love 2000. It's one of my favorite games ever.
yeah, it was a good game.
It was so good back in the day. So I tried playing a demo of King of Fighters 13. I hated that.
Yeah.
It did not feel like King of Fighters, but it seems everybody is more happy with King of Fighters 14. What did they change to make it better?
They made it easier. They
Okay.
made it easier, so more people are playing it. I
Mm,
personally think 13 is like for the last generation, for like the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 generation.
mm,
I think King of Fighters 13 was the best game, even against Street Fighter 4 and
mm,
Tekken Tag Tournament, Tekken 6. I think King of Fighters 13 was the best overall fighting game
mm.
of last generation, but it was very hard. People, you can pick it up, right? You can play how
Yeah,
you just pick up Street Fighter 5.
casually,
That game
yeah.
was not
Mm,
easy, yeah. So that's why people, I think, were turned off by it. But me, as a fighting game fanatic, I love that fighting games are hard, even though I can't play them.
mm.
I love that there's depth to that. That there's only that guy can do that combo, right? So if he does it and he lands it, I mean, good on that guy because that was hard to do.
Mm.
Whereas, if it's something that's super easy and anybody can do it, then where is the scaling as far as who is actually good versus who is, kind of working off of a sort of flow chart? If I press X, then Y follows.
Okay, so there are people who like just learn strings of things.
Yeah.
Um,
And
in
yeah, basically.
Okay, so like, how many different types of like fighters do you get? I mean, fighting game players. Like, what are the common types of play styles that you get?
Well, you would have, so let's take a look at like the casuals, right? The casuals,
Mm,
you have the guy that doesn't block lows, right? So you can abuse that because he's always standing. And then you have the button masher who doesn't care about what you're doing. He just wants to put as many buttons out there as possible, and hopefully some of them land.
mm.
Which sometimes, if you're not careful, those guys will really mess you up
Yeah,
because they're so unpredictable.
that's how I
Um,
get killed. My friend Ryan, he button mashes, and like the only way I can defend against it is using like projectile attacks. But once it gets close
yeah,
to me and starts button mashing, I'm finished. And sometimes you can turn
yeah.
around the match like just like that.
So against those players, you really have to know what is safe and what is unsafe, so you know
Mm,
what to punish, right? So you can't
mm,
use that move because, by the time you're able to block, I can already push you back. So,
mm,
and then when it comes to like a more intermediate level, which is where I think I am, um, you have players who know spacing, right? So they know I can't throw out this move because I know he has a certain move that can really do some damage and reverse momentum. And then you have other play styles like the turtle, right, who won't approach. He'll just stay back and wait for you to do something so you can counter, kind of like a counter striker. And then you have just the absolute rushdown monster who, doesn't like playing defense, just wants to go up there and poke, 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 and then hopefully land. And so he can get a big combo and then push you into the corner and just keep you in there. And then the highest level, which is the pro level, and then you get to like esports, right? Like the highest fighting game players. That's when it becomes science, where you have frame data. This move is -7 on block, so I can punish with a move that can punish that move. They know different setups, so if you knock you down, he can cross you up on which side, and it looks ambiguous. And then they have just the clutch factor of and reactions and everything that puts them over the top as far as the knowledge of not only their character but your character, and the knowledge of like different stages and the overall meta of the game, of what the game allows you to do. Like certain games have vertical jumping, certain games have sidestepping, certain games have corners, others don't. So just putting that all together is what really puts like those players at the top, and that's what makes them so hard to beat, because they're so composed, they're so well rounded, and they don't get rattled. At least most of them don't get rattled.